Hello, and welcome back to the Notebook Podcast, where we talk about what others don't. I am your host, Morgan Daley, and today's episode is entitled The Power of Being Blonde. Now, this episode was strategically titled this and has been in my notes for several years, pretty predominantly for how much it will immediately turn people off. And that's kind of the point of the episode. Why is it that we have such strong opinions and biases ingrained into our media, our society, and therefore our subconscious just based on a hair color? So this is in part inspired by some video essays written by The Take on YouTube. In the end, I do my own sort of assessment of the more recent Barbie film, which I had the idea of this podcast even before that film had come out. But we're going to talk about some history of Hollywood and how exactly we categorize women and how it's really not doing a service to anyone. I do want to name before we dive in that I am familiar enough with audio to know that the sound quality in the last few episodes has been pretty shitty. But honestly, I was using voice memos despite also having GarageBand and Logic, and the microphone situation, I have my own lapel mics. I have somebody else's, but that connects to a phone. My phone's broken. I do have a boom mic, but honestly, my computer mic works better than that boom mic for some reason, but I am getting my own condenser mic. We do have a full recording studio on campus, but I don't know, it seems like a little much to rent the recording studio every time I'm making music and making a podcast. So yeah, hopefully this is a little better. I redid that intro and now I'm using GarageBand for podcasts and Logic for music, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But let's dive into it. Okay, so personally, I was naturally blonde growing up, and now I believe I'm naturally like a really dark blonde or light brunette. I'm not certain because I started lightening my hair as soon as it got darker when I was young because I felt a sense of identity with being blonde. And that identity came despite not at all identifying with a lot of the dumb, shallow, spoiled, mean, naive, self-centered, over-sexualized, or infantilized stereotypes of the hair color. Also, quick disclaimer, I am sorry if my voice is a little hoarse. I've been doing a lot of vocal training, and also this will probably be like a 2-hour episode because there's like 6 pages of notes, so this is gonna be a long one. I don't know. Go on a road trip, wash your dishes, do something fun. Being blonde for many can be perceived as a liability, having to work twice as hard to be considered as hardworking, intelligent, grounded, or even kind in many cases. I think why I might have identified with the hair color so deeply growing up is because I experienced projections and assumptions not just about my hair or appearance, but about every part of my outward identity by everyone I grew up around. However, now I am toying around with the idea of dyeing my hair for future album eras, but seems how I'm working on the one about my early life, I'm gonna stay blonde for quite a bit of time. But I digress. Getting back to these projections, being kind or smart or meaningfully contributing to society despite how I looked was symbolic for me. Furthermore, it filters out the people who will immediately project, hate, or sexualize you based on your appearance. It's a wild experience because it's really just a hair color. But we'll focus on a character that personifies the blonde character stereotype to a T. Miss Elwoods herself. The movie focuses on a, albeit flippant, but pernicious all the same form of discrimination. In fact, we're so used to assuming that these individuals have some degree of pretty privilege that we entirely dismiss that they are more often than not overlooked in intellectual pursuits, hypersexualized, or even socially isolated and face contempt solely based on how one looks. This could be worse for neurodivergents or other individuals who have more of a difficulty reading these social circumstances or masking their eccentricities. Though this stereotype is rooted in a deeply harmful to people of color pedestal of purity assumed through the whiteness and blondness, the dehumanizing of these women into concepts more than people throughout the past several decades of media has had real world implications on our psyches and assumptions. At first, Elle's character starts as a caricature of the trope. She is attractive to men, she has more fun, she is seen as sweetly naive and perceived to be the antithesis of serious or intellectual pursuits. Legally Blonde goes on to disprove these assumptions on these women that are labeled as ditzy, lazy, or shallow. Elle Woods doesn't just subvert but rewrites this narrative to show us that these women are optimistic, warm, and hold inspirational outlooks. Elle's blonde hair and the pre-established identities that others project upon her define who she is perceived as in the eyes of nearly everyone she encounters. People approach Elle with the preconceived notion that she is frivolous, superficial, or that she skates by only on her looks. But as the take puts it, Legally Blonde most notably dismisses one of the most pernicious stereotypes, that she is dumb or lacks discipline. At first, Elle focuses her brilliance upon topics that our society dismisses as invaluable. I will most likely have a future episode on why we diminish women's interests and the impact on our collective consciousness and society when we do so. But for now, let's continue our focus on Elle, or more specifically Reese, because she does this character a great service by leaning into the traits to a comical point and then showing us that they're not mutually exclusive. The most valuable lesson that Elle teaches us is that being sweet and feeling is more important than just being intelligent, as everyone in the film is intelligent, but it's her compassion that makes her stand out or be someone that you would actually desire to engage with. We learn that other people we see are more superficial than Elle is assumed to be. The power of the blonde philosophy, the things that make Elle stand out are the fresh perspectives she brings to the table. First, often misinterpreted for naivete, Elle allows herself to be deeply optimistic, despite what life throws at her, which is often a higher quantity of others' most negative perspectives. This skill allows Elle to will herself through achievements that others don't even try for, because of their pre-concluded assumptions that these things are out of reach for them. Second, it is a matter of principle to Elle to be kind, to meet people and opportunities with openness and good manners, and this allows her diversity in friendship. Then there is her optimism, fostering resiliency against animosity, showing underlying fortitude and grit. Finally, Elle is more concerned with genuinely being smart than being perceived as such. She doesn't project the trappings of intelligence. She focuses on actually doing the work and uncovering the truth. Her unique perspective allows for her aptitude to be expressed unconventionally. To quote the take, she thinks a question through deeply and honestly, referring to her personal feelings and experiences to guide her. Elle cares more for the truth than winning. Unlike those successful around her, this uniquely equips her to work in more depth until she can actually prove her intuition. A facet of this is that Elle does not judge nearly as often or as quickly as the other individuals that we encounter throughout the film. She is not quick to make assumptions, and her opinion is adaptable to new evidence. In Elle's graduation speech, she states, "You must always have faith in people," despite very few people having given her the benefit of the doubt. But perhaps even more importantly, despite all the digs to her self-esteem, she manages to have faith in her own capabilities. To expand upon her more grounded than most priorities, Elle has integrity, which earns her trust. Elle's word holds significance to her, and she deeply cherishes her connections with others. She has an impressive number of intimates that invest in her trials and success, which is a testament to how she values relationships and proves it through the action of showing up and staying true to her promises. Elle can be seen as the antithesis of Warner, as he doesn't hold anything sacred except the pursuit of success, which ironically ultimately leads to his downfall. She dives into pursuits with commitment and enthusiasm. She is not immune to the embarrassment, but prioritizes her joy and knowledge of self over the disdain of others. She is unapologetically authentic. Elle's refusal to diminish the qualities of self others would deem inferior allows her to rise to success without devaluing her femininity. Perhaps most important, Elle's philosophy is to live passionately and never hide what she loves. Passion is often a centerpiece of cliched graduation speeches, but Elle doesn't just disagree with Aristotle and her professor. She shows us what living passionately looks like in action. Her greatest strength as a lawyer is her attunement to how she is feeling and the action it inspired her to take. This allows her to be a more forceful, coherent person with a clear sense of self. She shows up stronger in her relationships and has expectations of respect because she does not water herself down at all. The philosophy of thinking blonde doesn't mean that you have to be blonde. These characters and caricatures show real people and stereotypes that, under closer examination, demonstrate to us that there is nothing more compelling than unapologetic, embodied authenticity. This is what makes Elle shine in a dull world. It's not any particular aesthetic choice, but the mindset she approaches life with. Pre-Hollywood stereotypes can be challenging to trace, but Victoria Sharrow's Encyclopedia of Hair tells us that there may be a history linking the concepts of blondness and promiscuity. In the Roman Empire, quote, blonde hair was associated with prostitutes who had either dyed their hair blonde or wore wigs. Blonde hair was seen as provocative and a symbol of female seductiveness until the late 1300s in Europe. Artists often depict Eve as blonde and the Virgin Mary as brunette. Blondness is a recessive trait, so to try to psychologically decipher why it might be perceived as more desirable is because it is biologically more rare. Often people, myself included, sort of age out of their blondness, so it can be linked with the idea of fertility, but that has concepts challenging in and of themselves. But there's also the ideology that it's been associated with gold or light. Despite there being no universally appealing trait, blondness was often equated with attractiveness throughout media history. Well, especially European and US media history. We'll touch on a few of these tropes, but they've been categorized as this hate that we deem towards the people we perceive as attractive and our cultural concern with tearing women down. First, the blonde versus brunette dichotomy. Though sometimes the blonde is more down to earth and the brunette more exotic, the trope pits women against each other and pedestals men as the prize, often equating the heights of womanly ambition to a ring. As long as exceptional women believe that they need a successful man above all, that keeps a small demographic of men on top and all women down. The rivalry boils down to sexism. The goal is to pigeonhole women to one avenue of power and limit her potential, so she could never even become competition for a man in the realm that they actually respect. Circling back to the Legally Blonde example, why Elle's professor making a pass at her causes her to doubt herself so deeply that she almost quits, when no other sleazy remark or disses to her aptitude ever does, is because he is in a position of power and respect. He had just validated her mind and her hard work, and she entrusted in him to evaluate her worth as a lawyer, but he reduces her to a sexual identity. Elle is consistently dismissed no matter how many accolades she earns. It challenged why she could even try in a world that is incapable of perceiving her with any real depth, and therein lies the root of these damaging narratives. Our subconscious doesn't differentiate these stories as fiction, so we carry these ideologies. Even if we do not accept them, we are taught to doubt a woman's capabilities. Why Legally Blonde stands out as a film to so many of us is not Elle's grit in holding true to her worth, but her society finally seeing how brilliant she was all along. Reese Witherspoon herself has been typecasted as an actor, limited from roles with depth, darker themes, nuance, or unlikable characters. The first dumb blonde we can trace back in entertainment was inspired by a French courtesan, Rosalie Doucet, in the 18th century play, Les Curiosités de la Fleur. I'm so sorry for butchering that. She was also recorded as not speaking very much at all, so the literal sense of the word dumb was also applicable. Jean Harlow starred in The Platinum Blonde 1931 and Bombshell in 1933, and she defined her characters as having primal sex appeal, untroubled by many thoughts. Annette Kuhn publishes The Woman's Companion to the International Film, which labels 3 blonde stereotypes that emerged in film. First, the bombshell. This trope gave us explosive sexuality that came at a cost to a man, such as a lack of devotion, but was simultaneously a prize to be bought. Second was the dumb blonde. This trope matches the sexuality of the first, but has a dangerous density that is often cultivated simply to appeal to men, to be inferior for their egos. Both Jane Mansfield and Marilyn Monroe, who popularized this trope, were in fact very intelligent women. More modern renditions, as seen in Pamela Anderson, Jenny McCarthy, Jessica Simpson, or Paris Hilton, were often playing a character as a means of marketing. Third is the ice cold blonde, such as in the Hitchcock films. Think Grace Kelly or Kim Novak. This trope perpetuated that blondes are hiding something under the innocent facade and aren't to be trusted. All of these tropes are connected as they may be idolized in a sort of distorted manner, but most predominantly they are objectified as less than human. Because these stereotypes are so ingrained into our media's humor toolbox, it has often been challenged, subverted, or saturnized. Madonna is credited with empowering this brand of sexuality through her Blonde Ambition tour. Buffy the Vampire Slayer subverted expectations by giving Buffy a darker purpose. Arrested Development satirized the vacant blonde with the character Charlize Theron, who had a mental handicap, which goes relatively unnoticed because people come to expect this from her. But, as detailed above, Legally Blonde is perhaps the most coherent challenge to the stereotype produced to date, maybe until the Barbie movie. We'll get into that in a second. Cher from Clueless is another response to the cultural contempt for the Valley Girl of the early 2000s. But it was deeper, a disrespect for teen girls and a cultural movement to belittle them. To dive into the one-dimensional symbol of Marilyn Monroe, which is far deeper into the realm of the concept of mystic femininity than what remains as a true natural brunette as Norma Jean was, or a true woman, period. Her character on and off screen bled together and paved the way for how we perceive celebrity, femininity, and relationships. She is known as America's most prominent sex symbol, melding knowing coyness and naivete. This idea of her began while she was still alive, by not being ashamed of posing for nude photos. She got to be both sexual and innocent with her honesty, free from deception, and instead tapped into this feminine zest for life. She epitomized womanhood. She was described as being in touch with her body and sexuality in a manner that other women just did not portray. But this also undermined her talent and the work as an actress by naming this as a natural embodiment. She was forced into ideals of womanhood that didn't fit her naturally, like domesticity, in her marriage. She obtained stratospheric levels of fame and universality in becoming of a symbol, but lost her sense of humanity. People became possessive over Marilyn and attempted to have control over her behaviors that brought her to their attention in the first place. And this contributed to our collective idea of Marilyn as an idea more than a woman, but who all the same existed entirely for men. Though she is seen as an empowered embodiment of womanhood, it is still through the service of the male gaze. Moving on to a modern take of the classic artificial image of the white blonde femininity in media in Greta Gerwig's 2023 Barbie movie, geniusly casting Margot Robbie as Barbie, as she, not unlike Reese Witherspoon, had been typecasted, but perhaps even more into over-sexualized and objectified characters in her career to that point, which made her the perfect doll. To quote the introductory narration, all of these women are Barbie, and Barbie is all of these women. She might have started out as just a lady in a bathing suit, but she became so much more. Skipping ahead a little bit. Because Barbie can be anything, women can be anything, and this has been reflected back onto the little girls of today in the real world. Girls can grow into women who can achieve everything and anything they set their minds to. America Ferrera's speech was so impactful to be represented on screen, but at the end, where she acknowledges that these things women endure are no different for a doll representing a woman, it's because we can hold unrealistic expectations to people that we don't see as people. But as Barbie says in her response, by giving a voice to the cognitive dissonance required to be a woman under the patriarchy, you robbed it of its power. The movie points out these footholds towards revolution with lines such as, Kenland contains the seeds of its own destruction, or, you have to make them believe you are complacent. Another in, the restored Barbie's brain and autonomy, or a line from one that had yet to be done for, I don't deserve this, I would like to thank a Ken. Then there was Barbie's iconic, either you're brainwashed or you're weird and ugly. I loved how one Barbie claimed that she was holding both logic and emotion and allowing that to expand, not diminish. And the fun juxtaposition where the Kens had no identity outside of Barbie's gaze. The line one Barbie had said when she claimed that she enjoyed being a quote-unquote helpful decoration under the patriarchal brainwash portion of the movie, or how our lead Barbie, played by Margot Robbie, learned how life is all about change and it's terrifying, or even the women in powerful positions and believing that they could deserve them without sacrificing any expression of femininity, are all shocking, mirror to our faces moments. Which is why it is so funny that they pointed out how Barbie's mirror wasn't even real. But these moments that at first glance could be written off as throwaway challenge how we perceive our identity as a woman. Though lines such as, I'll play the guitar at you, made me laugh at the insanity of it all. Lines like when Barbie points to the fact that she could feel that her objectification had a violent undertone were wholly too real. The pushback from men in response to this film was because it was one of the first times something in media wasn't made entirely for them, but it simultaneously shows how the patriarchy is a disadvantage to men, as Ken is not validated in having feelings. At the end of the film, Barbie says, "I want to be a part of the people who make meaning, not the thing that is made. I want to do the imagining, not be the idea." Fundamentally, the feminist fight is towards autonomy and agency, equal opportunity. What Weird Barbie, God, you gotta love Kate McKinnon, is saying to our Margot Robbie Barbie when she says, "You have to want to know," is that we as women have the responsibility to ourselves and to our daughters to do the uncomfortable, to become educated, to take risks, to bet on ourselves, to challenge the structures that harm us. I know many thought that the ending of Barbie was a bit odd, but the last line did not just subvert expectations, it normalized and celebrated women's health and autonomy by naming it. And I did actually talk to my work study supervisor because at the moment I am producing this podcast through my school. But my school is like the least conventional thing on the planet, so I'm going to say what they named was Pussy Power. People were so uncomfortable by that ending because we don't talk about women's health or acknowledge the root or the physicality of our connection to pleasure or the void or our capability of transcending dimension into a spiritual, metaphysical, intangible, emotional, intellectual realm. Obviously, we have a long way to go. As the film itself joked, people are still uncomfortable with the idea of a pregnant doll, and for a long time there were only baby dolls, molding women to believe that their only future could be in domesticity. And in the Barbies themselves, there is this simultaneous lack and exaggeration of one image of female sexuality that provides us a odd sense of comfort, allowing our children, or should I say, our girls, to play with this toy. Clearly a long way to go. This film did something truly remarkable by creating something by and for women. Though that catalyst was made through the limited lens that we have for women in Hollywood, it was a necessary start to representing the depth and nuance of the female perspective in media. Furthermore, films such as one of my favorites, which is Elizabeth Banks' 2019 Charlie's Angel, it didn't receive the accolades it deserved because Elizabeth Banks' direction was for women. Not to say that the previous Charlie's Angels movies or shows weren't empowering for women, but again, they were empowering for women through the male gaze, where their power came from mostly their sexuality. Yes, they were trained and yes, they were smart, but Elizabeth Banks's angels were so deeply trained and intelligent and didn't have to hypersexualize themselves to get the job done. In fact, Kristen Stewart's character even named when sexuality is used as a tool or when women entirely are dismissed, and that invisibility is a benefit. That the agency itself is conscious of how their agents are being perceived and utilizing that in the field. And yet, the film itself didn't perform well because we are still more comfortable hypersexualizing and underestimating women. Back to the Barbie movie, when the character of Ruth said, "We as mothers stand still so our daughters can look back and see how far they've come," I could personally relate to this in the way that I've stood as time capsules of myself through healing and becoming. And otherwise, I realized that in the absence of this in my life, I understand how profoundly important it is. Not that women should freeze after an arbitrary goal of societal womanhood, but that communities should reflect back our own evolution and support each other's becoming. It is why I create and share what I do. And the fork in my soup is this, Barb. This audio essay helped to heal all of the parts of me that were shamed by my peers and formative adult figures for how I looked instead of how I thought or the potential of what I could become. I dedicate this episode to the little girl I spent 2 decades healing. I am so sorry you were silenced, and I am so grateful that you never listened. Thank you to everyone else who also happened to listen to this episode. I am grateful you spent your time here with me today, and I'll see you back here next week. Bye.